Hello everyone and welcome to your feedback video for your recent Elizabethan England Mock Exam, Paper 2. This will also be a good walkthrough reminder as you get closer to your exams as well, just to remind you how to do Paper 2. Okay, as ever, these walkthrough videos work better with your paper in front of you. This is so you can have a little look at what you wrote in your answers, structure, mistakes, and also what you did well. You can pause the video wherever you need to, rewind or go forward, or just focus on one bit at a time. You should be reflecting on your technique and the content that you've chose in your exam, and hopefully this video will give you examples of both of those features. And just break down the video into chunks. It definitely is too long to do this all in one go. Maybe focus on one question at a time to really get the most out of the video and reflecting on your own work. Okay, so I would definitely do one question at a time, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour here and there, and then go away. Also, looking through the video, even if you didn't do one of the questions, it's still useful revision to watch the whole video, as in your exam this question may pop up. So for example, if you did legitimacy in this, then watch the Northern Rebellion as well, and vice versa. Alright, so the topics that this video will look at will be leisure and entertainment in Elizabethan England. That's one of your 2 markers. The Privy Council was also the features question. The rise of poverty was your 12 marker. And then you had the choice between the early challenges Elizabeth faced and the Northern Rebellion. Both of those being the 16 markers. Okay, so paper 2 general feedback. Keeping in mind as well, this paper is 55 minutes long, 3 questions, and it's worth 32 marks. This is the one where you have to do the Cold War paper or the other paper 2 as well, if you do a different topic. So you'll have an hour and 45 minutes and you'll have both papers on your table and you get to choose which one you do first. And everybody has different views on which one to do first. But remember to keep your time management really strict to 55 minutes. So we'd also recommend with this paper that you work your way from the back to the front, do the big question first, then the 12 marker and then the 2 markers, just to make sure you've got time to do everything you need to in that 16 marker. Alright, so generally time management is much improved. Give the appropriate time to the question, so half an hour for the big question, around about 20 minutes for the 12 marker, and then 5 minutes maybe for the 2 markers. Just aim for that roughly, but certainly, as I've said, give the big question the most time. Maybe start with that one, just so you know that you've done it properly. Alright, the opening line of the focus of the question is still causing us some issues. Make sure in that first line of any question, in every question, that you use the words of the question in that sentence, just to keep you focused on what it is that you're doing, and also to make sure any judgments are clear as well. So that first line really does make a huge difference to the rest of your essay. Question 1, the knowledge questions, they're generally really good, but they should be. They are only 2 marks, so you don't need to do a hell of a lot of work for it, but also there's still 4 marks to lose if we don't do it properly. So well done. The question 2, the 12 marker, the poverty in this case, probably needs a little bit of work still, so hopefully after watching this video you'll feel a lot more confident in what you should have said, but also it's not really content so much, it's the structure still causing us a few issues. Remember, there's no need for an introduction or a conclusion in the 12 marker. You do need lots of facts in each paragraph, aiming for at least 3 facts in each paragraph probably, and then you've got to be able to say how those facts and that evidence helps you explain why poverty increased. As I say, hopefully the feedback in a minute will give you some ideas on where you could improve on that, but definitely not wasting time with introductions and conclusions. We can see that time is really tight, we just don't have any to do that. Alright, and the 16 markers, again, generally done very well. Most of us are doing the 3 reasons or paragraphs beyond the bullet point. We must, definitely highlighting must, we argue it in relation to the focus of the actual question. Don't make up your own question, make sure that everything we say reflects back on the question that the exam board are asking us. This is the difference between the 12 and the 16 marker, the analysis language that you're using really will separate the 5s from the 7s and so on. Alright, and then a couple of blank papers again. Please just make sure you write something. If you're struggling and you're thinking, oh, I don't know about technique, what's structure, I don't know what the teacher's talking about, just look at the question, look at the bullet points and just write as much as you can on those things. You will definitely get marks by doing that, so just don't leave it blank. Alright, and a few marks here and there is going to make a huge difference to your overall grade. Just write something about what you see in the question. Okay, right, so the 2 markers then. Let's start this feedback video with the 2 easy questions. One feature of something. I reckon about 2.5 minutes on each of these. You probably won't need 2.5 minutes, but just in case, use that time, all right? So this is the strongest performance, so let's keep looking after the really easy marks in our exams. All you have to do is pick out a feature, identify the feature in relation to the question, make sure again we're using in the words of the question in our opening sentence. That's a mark just for identifying a feature, any feature, and more often than not there's hundreds of possible features we could pick for any topic. Then we need to support that feature with some detailed knowledge. Now the feature, the information that you include has to relate to the feature you've identified, so there'd be no point saying something like the Privy Council met 3 times a week and then going on about religious changes or something. It has to relate to the feature that you pick. And this is exactly the same as in paper 1 in the trenches. So once we master this, we really don't need to give it any more thought at all. And this definitely is the easiest of the questions in your entire GCSE. So let's get this one right every time, getting 4 out of 4 every single time. Okay, so firstly, let's have a little think about the possible features of leisure and entertainment. But a bit of a sticky point really for a couple of you. You wrote a feature of entertainment being the dancing and the stuff that goes on at the court. Technically speaking, the court isn't really leisure and entertainment. There's dancing and there's entertainment and all sorts goes on there that is classed as entertainment. However, generally speaking, you're summoned to the court. You have to go if the Queen wants you to. And the entertainment of the court really was for her. And everyone else sort of benefited a little bit just by being there. So I personally wouldn't be going with leisure and entertainment being anything to do with the court. That's more of a sort of governmental feature. Anyway, let's have a look at a couple of examples. Bear in mind there are many that you could do, and we could be here for half an hour just on this question. So I've picked out a couple of easy ones, I think, and some possible other alternatives. So remember, I was starting this one feature of Elizabethan leisure and entertainment, so we can see that we're using the words of the question in our answer in the very first sentence, and then I've identified that spectator sports was a feature. This now allows me to follow up with the second sentence, anything at all about spectator sports, nice and easy and open. So you can see the detail that follows up that feature is there were many spectator sports where people could watch and bet on the outcome. For example, cockfighting, where bets would be placed on which cockerel would survive. It's only worth 2 marks. We need to get straight in and straight on. Feature is identified and then some quite straightforward detail that just backs it up a little bit. You could talk about other spectator sports as well if you wish. Instead of cockfighting, you could mention bear baiting. You could talk about the teeth and then dogs getting beaten up by the bear or whatever, the cost of the bear, likely not wanting to be killed because it's too expensive. As I say, there are many things you could talk about. We could do bull baiting, again, where bulls go up against dogs, and there's rings set up and all sorts of things. Essentially the same thing here with the spectator sport is that we're talking about people watching rather than taking part. Okay, so that's an example, hopefully a really easy one that you can see from that. You could also pick out a different kind of feature that not necessarily to do with spectator sports, but one feature of Elizabethan leisure and entertainment was that it was dependent on your class. So you could bring in any example now of different sports for different classes or different entertainments. So I've said in my follow-up detail, a little bit more detail than the last one, but still within 2.5 minutes should be very possible. There were many participation sports in Elizabethan England depending on what class you belong to. For example, rich people would play real tennis, whereas poor people might play football, which was very violent. So we've got a little bit of supporting information on 2 different sports that the different classes might do. Okay, and again, looking at the possible features that you could pick from this or examples of different sports, we can see all of these things here: bowls, fencing, wrestling, hunting, hawking, fishing, archery, music, literature and reading. I put in brackets as well there things that may have affected men, women, or certainly the rich and the poor. You can see that there's many more things about the poor, about the rich than the poor. The poor will probably do similar things, but their own version of it. So these are specific examples that you could pick if you are going to talk about the features of class. So keeping in mind that people would do these things possibly, especially in the arenas where I don't know, bear baiting or cockfighting might take place. Definitely they might possibly be in the same arena, but not mixing, and they wouldn't necessarily be sat with each other, the rich and the poor. So again, there's loads of possible things to say on this. You just need to be confident, but you only need one. And some of you are picking like 2 or 3 examples in a question like this. So talking about, for example, bowls, hunting and wrestling, you just need one. So don't waste your time on any more than one, sorry. Okay, and then a third example of what I think might be quite useful would be to think about the theatre. The theatre perhaps has its own standalone bit of entertainment. So one feature of the Elizabethan leisure and entertainment, again, the focus of the question, was the theatre. So the theatre is what I've identified. I'm going to just write any old sentence now or supporting detail that gives me something about the theatre, something specific. So I've said in my example, the theatre was a key part of entertainment in Elizabethan England. All classes could go to the theatre. The rich might sit on the stage, they could be seen by everyone. The poor would pay 1 pence to be in the pit. All right, something like that. And that possibly even is a little bit more than is needed, but I'm certainly going to guarantee the 2 marks with that. Other features that you could choose from the theatre: the mystery religious plays, a band. This is a way of controlling what people think. A lot of the old plays were religious in theme and tone, which many felt would incite some sort of violence after a play. Comedy shows were very popular. Remember that the Elizabethans were quite foul. The Tudor people generally, their comedy, their humour was quite foul, so they enjoyed a comedy show. Be a bit like stand-up today. These non-religious plays were very common as well because people didn't know the endings. That was a bit more exciting. Obviously, the old Bible plays, they knew what was going to happen because they've read the Bible, or certainly had the Bible read to them and the stories told to them at church. So the fact that they didn't know what was going to come at the end of these new plays was quite exciting for them. Another feature you could have maybe mentioned: the Puritans hated the theatre. They see it as a distraction. Obviously, everything's a distraction from God. Some other more specific features of the theatre is that you need a licence after 1572 just to ensure that the content would be passed by the government. This is particularly in the 70s after some of the Catholic challenges that have arisen. Purpose-built theatres due to the rising popularity, so the theatre called the theatre will be good, and all parts were played by men. All right, men or boys. So again, there's loads of features about the theatre you could pick. Just remember that for Edexcel, our course, we did not need to mention Shakespeare at all. This is because Shakespeare was in the 90s and our course only goes up to 1588. So hopefully you can see there for leisure and entertainment quite a straightforward load of examples. Have a look at what you put, see if you got full marks, and if you didn't, hopefully you can understand why you didn't. Usually it will be that opening sentence or the identifying, which is a little bit weak. Okay, so just pause the video if you want to have a quick revision and recap on some of the examples on the screen. They're just what we've talked about already, what men and women can do, upper classes. Obviously, you'll need a bit more detail in your writing if you do this, but this is quite a nice place, whilst we're reflecting and revising, just to have a little think about some of the activities that could be done in Elizabethan England. All right, so let's do the next option, our Privy Council. Again, nice and easy, straightforward, 2 marks, 2 minutes. So again, we're going to start really straightforward. One feature of Elizabeth Privy Council was, so I'm using the words of the question in there, and I'm identifying that it had 19 members. That's the feature that I've picked. So my supporting information needs to be something along the lines of who's in that room, who's in the council or on the council. I have said Elizabeth chose a range of Catholic and Protestant members for her council to appease the Catholics and Protestants, minimising conflict, including some from Mary's reign for their experience. This also made it easier to get advice from fewer nobles. Now, again, possibly, I've said more than I need to there. Maybe you don't need the last little bit about the advice. However, if we can do this in our 2 and a bit minutes, then just make sure you guarantee the 2nd mark. So other features that you might pick that relating to the members, you could talk about that she rarely met with all 19. This helped control them. Usually there'd be like meetings of just 7 or 8 of them at a time. This was just a way of dividing and conquering, really, so she didn't have to control them all at once. Obviously, at times of need, they did meet together, all of them. The reason why she picked these different members is she wanted a range of viewpoints. She also probably knew how weak she was at the start of her reign, so it was important that she didn't upset the nobility straight away. You could also talk about William Cecil, who leads it, Secretary of State, who he controls all of the meetings and the agendas and government. And she used to use threats and rewards to help control them, so patronage, things like that. She could also threaten to take away their land and titles if the nobles on the council didn't play ball. So she used this to run the country. Obviously, it's part of government, one part of overall government. So hopefully that was nice and straightforward there as an example of the members of the Privy Council. All right, so a second example, just in case you pick something else. I have identified that it met 3 times a week. Most of you mentioned that. So our supporting information now needs to be something about what they discussed and why they met. So the Privy Council met 3 times a week and they offered Elizabeth advice on domestic or foreign affairs. They might meet more regularly in times of crisis. So we've definitely got our 2 marks there. You could end that a little bit better, probably a bit more secure with in times of crisis such as a war or a rebellion. All right, but that gives us a bit of a straightforward 2 marks about the Privy Council and how it met. Other features related to the meeting you could have picked: the Privy Council might advise the Queen on matters of marriage or alliances, which country to join up with, religion, when to go to war, if to go to war, and also to report back to the Queen issues from around the country, from the local areas, such as recusancy in their areas, fines, things like that. So that would where they'd be the nobles, who remember are probably JPs, and Lords Lieutenants, would report back what's happening in the counties around the country. So again, more detail that you could pick about why they met, just to get you your 2 marks there. All right, so hopefully question 1 hasn't proven too difficult and caught us up too much. The vast majority of us have got most of our marks in this. Just make sure you can check your papers and see where you might have fallen down a little bit. Okay, so the possibilities are endless almost with these features. I want you to just really take a time to think about this as we reflect on your papers. Don't assume the examiners know everything. Actually, in fact, assume they don't know anything. So make sure that your sporting detail isn't implied. Really clear what it is that you're saying in relation to your feature that you've identified. Some of you often sort of say they meet for important things. You're assuming the examiner knows what those important things are. So say what they are. Be explicit in your detail. That really should guarantee you getting all 4 marks. Right, so let's move on now to the 12 marker. It should be fairly straightforward to us by now. This is our 3 paragraphs. We are the same as the 12 markers, the same obviously in Germany, and medicine and Elizabeth. So by the time you get into your mocks now in year 11, and certainly your exams at the end of year 11, this 12 marker should be absolutely nailed on. All right, so first of all, let's consider what the question is asking us. It's asking us to explain why poverty increased. That is the nuts and bolts of the question. About 20 minutes, maybe 18 or so if you can do that. And they've given us the 2 bullet points there to think about. We could talk about population rise, and we could talk about inflation, but we must also use information of our own. So that's the 3rd paragraph that we keep talking about. Okay, so that's the gist of the question, and things to consider again generally and overall in this question rather than specific content, which will come in a minute, is again write something. Just write something. 3 paragraphs about something, or at the very least, if you don't know anything, just look at the 2 bullet points that they offer you and write something about them. It may not obviously get you 4 marks or even loads of marks, but it might pick you up 2 or 3, which could make the difference overall in your GCSE grade. So don't leave it blank. Try to link to previous points if you can within each other paragraph. Use words like accentuated, worsened, increased. That's obviously really good practice for paper 2 as well, the Cold War paper, or whatever you do in paper 2 if you're watching this for some other school. We're worsening, things are happening which is making the previous event worse, or increasing tensions, or whatever it might be. And the word accentuating is just a really good one to get that in. So once you've mentioned something in paragraph 1 perhaps, and if you have to sort of relay back to that again in paragraph 3, then you can say this made worse or this improved. Remember the structure, okay? It's still causing us a few problems with this 12 marker. Just 3 paragraphs, each of their own focus, population, inflation, or whatever, religion, whatever it might be. No intro, no conclusion. Please stop wasting your time with an introduction and a conclusion in the 12 marker. And then within each paragraph, very specific knowledge and facts. All right, and each time you mention these facts, you need to be explaining why they have increased poverty. Very clear, open and sentence, as we keep saying. The first line is crucial, especially in this 12 marker. It can be a little bit scripty in lots of ways, but certainly you want to be saying one reason why poverty increased was because of. in this first example, you might put population rise, full stop. That first line, your point, is making this really clear what this paragraph is going to be all about, and it needs to all be about population rise, nothing else. Okay, there's other paragraphs for some other reasons. And then your bullet points, they offer us the 2, as we've said, and you must do a third of your own, so make sure that you do. With that said, let's get on to looking at how this question might have played out in the end. You should be really getting minimum, I think, between 7 to 9 marks every time. Obviously, some of us are trying to get 12 every time. This feedback will give you the opportunity to get 12 out of 12, but also be able to see how you can build your answer up to be getting as a minimum 7 out of 12. All right, keep remembering to focus back on that question. So just before we do move on to the actual question, you can pause the video and have a quick scan of some of the key content, a little revision page here of the causes of poverty from our lessons. When you're ready, carry on. Okay, so why is poverty increased? Some facts that you probably need to include in this question, in this little fact bank, as a minimum. You probably need to be getting in there the fact that population has risen by about 35% in Elizabeth's reign, up to about 4 million by 1603. London growing rapidly too. You want to get 150,000 in there maybe. That's probably a straightforward fact of how big London got. The idea that the poor are spending about 80% of their income on a loaf of bread, that would be a really good fact to talk about poverty. And remember that 90% of the country lived and worked in the countryside. So some keywords to consider really in thinking about this topic is a vagabond is a person who wanders from place to place without a home. And an itinerant is people who've moved from their home or parish looking for work. Try and get those words correct in your answer. All right, and as a result of 90% in the country, then obviously 10% lived in the towns and cities, and that number is growing anyway due to people looking for work. So they're the sort of minimum facts that probably the examiner would expect you to include in a poverty answer. So let's move on and get started with the possible paragraphs you could choose. Now remember, with the 12 marker, unlike the 16 marker, you have complete freedom of choice. You do not need to do the bullet points they suggest. There is no statement telling you one of which is most important, like in the 16 marker, and then you choose the other 2. You can choose any 3 you want. In this question, you could choose from population rise, inflation, bad harvests, enclosures, sheep farming, or whatever else you think is important in leading to poverty increasing. So I will try in the feedback and in the model answers you'll see in a sec to try and do more than we need. Remember, you just need 3. Okay, so paragraph 1 then, if we go with population rise as the focus of our first paragraph, this image reminds you hopefully of the features that you might want to be bringing into this, but the content you want to be talking about definitely is that population growth. Your 35%. This put pressure on food supplies, housing and jobs, and in this paragraph you need to be saying why and how the population growth put pressure on those things. Don't just say it. You got to say why. Why did that lead to prices going up? Obviously, most of it is demand. Supply and demand equals prices go up and things like that. Again, you maybe want to talk about 90% of the country being poor, labourers or tenant farmers or working in agriculture, living in the countryside. That's quite an obvious thing to talk about in the population rise. And then the idea that a lot of them are now, there's new population growth. People are having to move to the towns and cities, putting pressure on them. Bear in mind as well that it's the country that would supply the food to the towns and cities. If there's no food coming from the country, then that's going to make the problem worse in the towns and cities as well. So you just got to sort of build up a little bit of a picture in this question, how each thing leads to the next thing, or population rise leads to food demand for land, cloth, things like that. So this diagram on the left of the screen, you can see, gives you basically your 3 facts really for this paragraph, and then you just have to explain them a little bit, how that affected poverty. Also, because there wasn't enough food to go around, it put prices up. That's obvious, although lacking a little bit in some of our explanations. It's again one of those things that we possibly imply to the examiner that we'll assume they can work that out, but we need to tell them that. Also, because of the demand for homes, it put rents up, which priced people out of their homes. Again, we've got to tell the examiner that explicitly. More people needing work meant that they were willing to accept low wages, which obviously reduced the wages, adding to everything else. And then finally, the demand for clothes put the price of cloth up. Maybe that's leading to why some of the landowners put sheep on their land instead, because they saw an opportunity for some extra profit on cloth. Or maybe they thought they were doing a service, providing more more cloth. So overall, population rise is quite a nice paragraph. We could probably get lots in there. But remember, we don't need to put all of that in. We've only got a little bit of time, remember, to get these questions done. So let's have a look at what this might look like in a model paragraph. This little graphic, just before we do that, gives you an idea of why people are moving and why the population rise has led to some of the problems. You can have a little read of that yourself. Pause the video if you want to look carefully, and then we will move on to this model paragraph. Alright, so as you can see, this is a paragraph that I've written. I want to just necessarily not read the whole thing to you, read most of it I guess, but I want to pick out some key bits of what I'm trying to do in my technique. So the first sentence, hopefully, is really, really clear. One reason why poverty increased in Elizabethan England was the rising population. So I've made it really clear in that opening sentence what the point of this paragraph is going to be about. This paragraph is going to be about population. So then it goes on to say, by the time Elizabeth died, there were an extra 1 million people in England, a 35% rise. So I've got my fact in there, and then I'm going on to explain why that was a problem. This meant that there was an extra demand for many more jobs. Because there were not as many jobs, lots of people became itinerants. Itinerants were forced to go from town to town looking for work and begging. Population rises also meant more people needed somewhere to live, which further led to poverty as the demand for housing went up. So I've put a second sort of fact in there as well. We're now talking about houses as well as we've just done jobs. So the rents went up, meaning more people were priced out of their homes, and only the new gentry and wealthy merchants could afford the rents. This was a problem in the countryside too, but particularly in London with about 150,000 more Londoners in just 45 years. Again, we've got a nice little fact in there. And then demand also impacted on food supplies. So we've got jobs, homes and food in this paragraph now, with more mouths to feed bringing about higher prices, meaning even more people found themselves in poverty. Hopefully you can see that we keep going back to the focus of the question, poverty. The growing towns and cities also suffered as they relied on their food being provided by the near 90% countryside workers. Just want to squeeze that fact in there really. And finally, the growing population impacted the cost of wool due to demand for clothing, further adding to the problem, further showing how population growth led to poverty. So again, linking back to the question one more time. So this paragraph, if you could do that in the time, so if we're looking at about, let's say 18 minutes to 20 minutes, you're looking maybe 7 minutes for a paragraph. If you get all this in, then you are absolutely nailing on full marks for this paragraph. There is possibly, in reality, a little bit too much in this paragraph for what you could maybe do in the time conditions. But that is the kind of gist of what you're trying to do, a clear opening sentence, loads of facts, but going back to the question and explaining why those facts help. So just pause the video again and just have a little look through this paragraph. Look at your own paragraph on population and just see what's similar, what have you done well, and what could you have added. Maybe a little bit extra explanation here and there, maybe a little bit, a few more facts. Just compare your paragraph to mine, and then when you're ready, we'll move on to paragraph 2. Okay, so paragraph 2, I'm going to choose for my example bad harvest and the enclosures. I'm going to put these two together. You might do bad harvest as its own and enclosures as its own, but I feel like for a topic like this, we could probably just merge the two together just to make sure we get the facts. So we know the facts we want to include in this are the harvests were particularly bad in the 1560s and 1570s, which has just added to or accentuated, remember, the population growth problem that we've just discussed. The demand for food was high, and now because of the harvest, there's even less food, making the whole problem worse. And bread and grain was the staple diet of the country anyway, so the fact that they haven't got their staple is adding to the problems. As we've already mentioned as well in the planning for this question, the countryside provided food to the towns and cities, which also is now adding to the problem in the towns and cities, not just in the countryside. And enclosing common land meant that the previously food that where they used to grow it on their own common land, maybe just enough for their own families or enough just to sell, called subsistence farming, that's now gone. So that's even less food being able to be produced either for their own families or for selling. However, please note, this is quite a significant fact, especially if this question is ever a 16 marker and we're talking about the biggest cause of poverty. Only about 2 to 3% of land was actually enclosed in reality, in the end. Where it did happen, of course, it had massive impact and was terrible. But for the bigger picture, it's going to be quite hard to blame enclosures for the poverty when really it was rarely done. Although definitely when it was done, it had a huge impact. All right, they replaced arable farming with sheep farming, so arable farming for crops, which again led to even less food available, increasing prices further. So we've got our plan. We want to pick maybe 3 of these things. Remember, 3 facts. and let's see how this might turn out into a paragraph. Just a little bit of revision before we do that, just to give you back in the frame of mind of what enclosure is, why it's good, why it's bad, what was before, what was after. Just pause the video, have a quick read of these things, and hopefully that will help you remember, as we are watching this for not just feedback but for revision, just in case this is a real question in your exam. Alright, so the second paragraph, bad harvest and enclosures, we can see again, hopefully, it's now starting to get into your head a little bit. This opening point, I've now said another reason for a rise in poverty was the bad harvest and enclosures. So you can see that in red, that is the point. That means this whole paragraph now is going to be about harvest and enclosures. It might refer to previous points, but generally speaking, the paragraph should be about harvest and enclosures. So there's quite a few bad harvests in England's reign, we know this, but 3 were terrible. 1 as she became queen, and 2 later in the 1560s and 70s, so she inherited that first bad harvest from Mary. But also a little side fact is that in 1558 it was a really good harvest, and Elizabeth used that as some propaganda to say that God had blessed her reign. But generally speaking, the 1550s wasn't great in Mary's reign, and then it got worse in the 60s and the 70s. So this caused increasing problems with food prices going up due to the demand worsened because less food was being produced, accentuating the crisis of rising population even further. So we're referring back to our paragraph 1, but we're also now saying how the food has made that worse, with a bit more detail than perhaps we included in paragraph 1. As a result, more people ended up hungry and having to beg for food. Also, lots of landowners started enclosing their land with hedges so that they needed to fewer labourers, meaning less people to pay, but obviously they lost their jobs, and then they lost their homes because they couldn't pay the rent. The common land that people used to grow their food on and grow extra to sell at market was taken away, and they were replaced by sheep, as this gave landowners a much bigger profit due to the wool trade, and also didn't need to pay wages to the sheep. Now you could again use the enclosures or the sheep farming as its own paragraph. I'm just trying to give you examples here on how it could look, and that's the sort of joy of a history exam, is although there's loads of content, that means there's loads for you to pick from. You don't need all of it. Probably if at most 20 to 30% of everything you know you'll ever write about in an exam, but it does give you that flexibility to sort of pick and mix what you do talk about. And it's clear to see in this kind of topic that we could do a whole paragraph on sheep farming, or we could merge it in a little bit into a paragraph like this. Anyway, so landowners kept some of their land to feed the sheep, not humans, which obviously is added to the problem again. Even less food for people. You could argue that's selfish and things, but we don't need to in this question. We're not being asked for the morals of the landowners. We're just being asked why poverty increased. There were now more people looking for jobs, but not as many jobs. Lots of farm workers couldn't afford food or houses, and they had to become itinerants. The bad harvest and enclosures made the crisis even harsher, thus increasing poverty even further. So again, we're raising back to the question at the end of this paragraph. So again, as previously, look at your paragraph. If you did the paragraph on harvest and enclosures, perhaps yours is even maybe better than this one, but looking for the facts and the structure, just make sure that you are including those techniques. Okay, so paragraph 3, I have gone for inflation in my example. So the content we want to include in our inflation is that wages didn't rise as quick as the prices, which leads to inflation, people not being able to afford food, clothing and rent. All right, so if it was a 16 marker, we could have all sorts of different arguments in this, couldn't we, about what was the biggest cause. Arguably, you would say inflation was, but you could also argue that inflation wouldn't have happened had it not been for various other problems like population rise. But in this case, it's just a 12 marker, so we don't need to be doing any of that stuff really, just get straight into it. Also, because people were so desperate for work, they were willing to take reduced wages. This meant poor wages went even lower, making the problem of inflation even greater. So they were literally willing to be paid something rather than nothing. And the landowners, the business owners, perhaps you could say, were very happy with this because they could pay people less money. The problem is that the price of everything is going up because there isn't any food or homes or land, as well as low wages, hence why you get inflation. All right, and the rents, as we've said, go up, making the demand even worse. Landowners could charge whatever they wanted, especially to new tenant fees. When someone took over a farm or a tenancy from somebody else, the landowner could charge them a new entrant fee. So again, things are looking good in a poor time for the wealthy, not so good for the poor. So let's have a look at this final paragraph for this 12 marker. Again, opening sentence, really clear what this paragraph is going to be about. A final reason for poverty increasing was inflation. Due to the high demand for food and rent, prices of food and rent went up. Mixed with the low wages too, led to high inflation. Adding to the crisis of bad harvest and high population, so you can see we're just linking back a little bit to what we said previously. Most families were spending about 80% of their money on a loaf of bread, if they could even get any at all. As well as this, because homes became so scarce and in demand, it allowed landowners to put their rents up. As a result, so we're explaining now with that fact, more people couldn't afford these rents, so had to move out and seek new homes, even if they'd lived there for a long time. Many were forced to go to the towns and cities looking for work. Wages also decreased, so even if they had a job, they couldn't afford these rents. Making inflation and low wages worse was the fact that people were so desperate to work, they were willing to accept even lower wages, meaning the landowners replaced their workers with cheaper workers, further adding to the poverty crisis and vagabondage increasing. All right, now you can see in there, just going back a little bit, we put a little bit of analysis in there, not necessarily like totally needed for a 12 marker, but it certainly helps and will impress the examiner. So we've said a bit there, haven't we, about what we said. As a result, more people couldn't afford these rents. Many were forced to go. When using words like even if and despite this and without that, if they could even get any at all, things like that, it's just giving a little bit of analysis and a bigger picture to your answer. The improvements in farming, to finish this paragraph, and enclosing the land led to even fewer jobs again, meaning the workers' willingness to work became even more desperate, leading to even more being made unemployed, meaning increased poverty. So again, we're going back to our question. The focus is poverty increasing. So again, a paragraph, I don't know if that's the best paragraph you'll ever read, but certainly, again, structure-wise, it's got enough facts in there, and we're trying to say why inflation has led to poverty. In the case of they can't afford anything, is probably the ultimate description of poverty, isn't it? All right, now they're the ones that I have picked for this model answer, and it's confusing, this question, and speaking to you in revision of it and reading some of your answers, it's quite clear that we're getting a bit frustrated, a bit bogged down, because they all sort of link to each other. It's hard to sort of identify paragraphs. Hopefully in the model answer you've just listened to shows you how you could do it, but of course there is going to be a lot of crossover in this kind of question. All right, just let me know if not, let your teacher know, if we still can't get our head around it, we'll talk a little bit more personally or via email or whatever, but it's important that we get this topic understood, because it could be a 60 marker and a 12 marker. There are probably, definitely, worse questions that we can have. But as a topic, this one is quite difficult, it's quite complex. So just while we're revising, we'll think about this as it was a 16 marker. What we've said is fine, but look at the yellow examples. This is the kind of language that we might include if this was a 16 marker and we were trying to be more argumentative. So we'd say things like, if it wasn't for population growing then, or despite population growing, enclosures made the situation worse because inflation might not have been so bad if it wasn't for the population growth, meaning people were willing to take lower wages just to get some wages. Although enclosures definitely made people poorer, the fact that in reality only 2.3%, 2 to 3% of the land was enclosed in England probably suggests it wasn't the main cause of poverty. So that kind of language, hopefully you can see, is if this was a 16 marker, you can clearly see how that is making judgments and analysis all the way through. All right, so poverty is quite a difficult one. Hopefully you feel a little bit more confident. Have a look again as you've done previously, but maybe now we've finished breaking it down into separate paragraphs. Read all the way through your one and see if you could make some easy fixes. See where you could have just added a little bit more. And if you're still completely stumped on this one, then let your teacher know. All right. So now on to the 16 marker. We need to spend more of our time on this. Obviously, again, this video is going to go on a little bit now because there are two possible 16 markers you could have chosen. I've tried to include very, very detailed feedback from both of them. As I said at the start of this video, regardless of which one you did, continue to watch the rest of the video for the other question as well, because it could well be on your exam in real life. So having some feedback and some practice on that can only be a good thing. All right, so the 16 marker requires most of our time, 30 minutes spent on this in your exam. So we'll start with the first option you had, which was Elizabeth's early challenges. All right, so this little diagram on the screen, just pause the video and have a very quick scan of it again. You'll have seen this in class probably. Certainly if I taught you, you will have seen this diagram, just showing you the early problems Elizabeth faced, just to start thinking about what kind of things could you have talked about in this question. All right, when you're ready, unpause and continue. All right, so the question is, Elizabeth's legitimacy was her biggest challenge at the start of her reign. So the whole entire focus of this one, if you chose to do it, was to be arguing, yes, what were the challenges that she faced, but in direct comparison to legitimacy. That is what the statement is saying. That is what the examiner is telling you. That's what we need to be focused on. If it was a 12 marker, it would just say explain why Elizabeth faced challenges, and you could pick any 3 you wanted. In this case, because it's a 16 marker and it's the same for medicine as well, you must focus on their statement to be able to get the top marks. Okay, so some overall feedback from the 16 marker generally before we go into more specifics. Again, write something. Similarly to the 12 marker, write something. Look at the bullet points and just write as much as you can about those bullet points if you are really struggling. But make sure you're writing something. 3 paragraphs. Take some time to think about the challenges she's faced at the start of her reign. Do maybe a quick plan. Scribble on your exam paper of the 3 things you might want to talk about. Remember the 2 bullet points are there to help you out a little bit, and you may need to just think of one of your own. But you have to discuss legitimacy, okay? So we'll need 3 paragraphs in total, 3 challenges. One of them has to be legitimacy in this case. Structure-wise, so unlike the 12 marker, this time we do need an introduction and a conclusion. Your judgment in your intro should be very clear. And hopefully you'll see what that would look like in the model answer in a minute. But it has to be a judgment in relation to legitimacy. Then we'll need our 3 paragraphs, so one of them being legitimacy, because that's the focus of the question. I would recommend that you do legitimacy first as paragraph 1, whether you agree or not really, just because then it allows you in your other 2 paragraphs to keep comparing back, saying why your next 2 challenges were more or less of a challenge than legitimacy, just because you've already mentioned it. However, that's not entirely the most important thing in the world, but I just think it makes it easier for you to show this argument going through. You keep going back. So as previously mentioned, this is less important than because, or this is more important than because. And then as always, within your paragraph, same as the 12 marker, you need some specific knowledge and facts that then are used to go on and explain why these things challenge the Queen. All right. Very clear opening sentence. That's signposting again in each paragraph. The first sentence is crucial in showing the examiner where you want to take them. It's your argument after all, so you want to be controlling the direction of your argument. Your bullet points, remember, as we've said, they offer you 2, but you must do a third of your own. One of the 2 probably will be related to the statements in the question, because otherwise they'd be essentially giving you all 3 then, wouldn't they? But remember, you need to do a third of your own. And keep referring back to the focus of the question, just like we've just seen in the 12 marker. You must be comparing and arguing everything back to legitimacy being the main challenge or not. And if it is, why is it more important? And if it isn't, why is it less important? Okay, so that's more general, some feedback for this question. I think it was done all right though in the main, but there's certainly a little bit of confusion in places, and technique could always be improved. So let us begin with the question. So the bullet points that you were offered are Elizabeth legitimacy, obviously, that's the focus of the question. Gender and maybe marriage, you could put those 2 together if you wanted to, and you must use some of your own. So a third paragraph could come from any of the following. It could come with the war in France. It could come from poverty, economy, and the bad harvest that she inherited, or it could be a paragraph on religion. In this feedback video, I have done a paragraph for all of these, just so you can see whether you picked it or not, where you maybe could have added other things, and maybe next time you might choose a different one based on the feedback, or maybe just to slightly improve your own answer. So with that said, let's begin going through this now, breaking it down each paragraph at a time. So some specific content that we need to think about in this question before we get onto it is, what are the challenges she faces? So we need to be aware of the sort of context at the time. The mark scheme often talks about contextual knowledge, what was going on at the time. You, in this case, must be really confident that you understand this question requires content from around 1558, the start of her reign. What was the biggest challenge at the start in 1558? Doesn't need you to be talking about the plot, the Throckmorton plot, the Ridolfi plot, even the Northern Rebellion, which some of you mentioned in this one. That's too late. That's 10 years down the line. So just avoid that. Remember to stay focused on the question. You will obviously to bring in a little bit of issues from Mary's reign, which is a year or 2 before, and maybe even a year or 2 after, but certainly not any more than that. Be focused on the start of her reign. Okay. Also, with that said, Mary Queen of Scots is relevant, but please keep in mind, and a lot of you said this, she's not in England yet. So some of you are saying that Mary Queen of Scots was a danger to Elizabeth because she's in England. That you're half right. She's not in England until 10 years later in 1568. And also another flashpoint that probably cropped up as I was reading this, and I guess possibly due to the way that we've taught it. But please remember that she has not got the heir yet. Baby James was born in 1566. So the idea about having an heir makes her more dangerous and all the rest of it is relevant, but for later on. At the start of her reign, Mary Queen of Scots is simply just a challenge to her because she has a legitimate claim to the throne and she's Catholic. And also she's got the French backing. So nothing to do with having the heir yet. However, Mary Queen of Scots is married, which means the likelihood of having an heir is higher. But make sure you're not confusing that little point there about when the baby was born. Then a third bullet point to consider in this bit is that Mary I is Elizabeth's sister, not her cousin. A couple of you have made that mistake a bit too often. And also then she's inherited this war with France. It was Philip's war, but Mary I went along with her husband, worsening the economy and the debt. So that's just a little aside, really, just to think about. Some of you are essentially saying that Elizabeth started the war with France. That's not quite the case. She inherited this war with France. And obviously she was unwilling to sort of give it up because it would make her look weak, and she also didn't want to lose Calais. Some of you have gone down that sort of route, but generally speaking, this is something she's inherited as a problem and as a challenge from her sister Mary I. And also, please don't get confused on the religions of these queens. Elizabeth is Protestant. The country is legally Catholic. Mary I made it Catholic through Parliament, but also 90% of the country are practicing Catholic. So in essence, what we're saying there is Elizabeth has inherited a Catholic country, and being a Protestant, that could be a challenge. All right, so an introduction. I'm going to give you two introductions now, bearing in mind, just to show you two different sort of slants, but the technique of it is what I'm trying to show you more importantly. The first one is actually my opinion, so this is what I might say. So we're going to start really clearly with the judgment, and the second word is our judgment. I have said I disagree to a larger extent that legitimacy was Elizabeth's biggest challenge at the start of her reign in 1558. And then I want to give a little bit of a thesis statement there, but I also need to say, because I have disagreed, I have to tell the examiner what I actually think was. So I'm going to say that straight away. I believe the war with France was the biggest challenge, so I've made the judgment there. And then the thesis statement, or the sort of reasoning behind my choice, is this is because it was a clear and present danger to a very insecure country. She had no means to fight it if an invasion took place. And then I'm sort of saying to the examiner, I'm going to talk about legitimacy and religion in this paragraph, in this essay as well, but hopefully you can see that I have made it really clear what I think and why I think it. However, for another example, you might agree. So another little introduction that I've maybe given as an example here. I have agreed to a larger extent that legitimacy was the biggest challenge to Elizabeth at the start of her reign. And then a little bit of a thesis statement as to why. If the people didn't accept her, then she would not be able to rule and they would probably support a foreign invasion. Religion is also a significant problem, but the people accepting her as legitimate monarch would also allow her to sort that crisis out. So essentially what I've got there is I've set up what I'm going to talk about by bringing religion into it, but I've also agreed with the statements. Now, this is the same as in your medicine course. If you can give a little bit of a thesis statement, a little bit of a why in your introduction in the 16 marker, then that's going to help sort of set up your argument really. So hopefully you can make sure you can see that. Have a look at your introduction and see if it's A, clear you've got a judgment, B, a thesis statement, and C, possibly set up the other things you're going to talk about in the actual essay. And then see if you think that was too difficult or if it was if you could see it. If you are struggling with the introductions, then obviously talk to your teacher. So let's get cracking then into what we could talk about paragraph 1 or challenge 1. We're going to do legitimacy because legitimacy is the focus of the question. So we'll talk simply about the facts that we want to include in this. Remember that in the eyes of Catholics, divorce isn't allowed. Many of them don't accept the first marriage to Catherine of Aragon was ever ended, meaning in their eyes Elizabeth is illegitimate and Anne Boleyn was just one of Henry's mistresses. They also don't accept the monarch as the head of the church. To them, the Pope is the head of the church, so only the Pope can grant this divorce, hence another reason why they might argue that marriage number 1 never ended officially. Henry himself excluded Elizabeth from the succession through Parliament, although he later reintroduced her or reinstated her, so legally at least she is legitimate. So that's a good argument for the counter in this paragraph. And then Mary Queen of Scots is arguably more legitimate. She is of Tudor blood, but remember what we've just said in our overall feedback, she does not have the heir at this point. All right, so that's the content you probably want to include in this first paragraph. And remember that legitimacy is the focus of the question, so you should be talking about legitimacy first, allowing you to compare later on. All right, you should be saying within the paragraph, at the end of the paragraph, why your examples prove legitimacy was a challenge. Or if you don't think it was the main challenge, then say why. It is important. Make sure in these 3 paragraphs, any question where you're judging importance, that you don't write off 1 or 2 as not important. The point of the history essay is that they're all important. Your job is just trying to argue why one is more important than the other. All right, so let's have a look at what this paragraph might look like in practice. Okay, so again, quite a big one. So you can pause it once I've talked you through a little bit and maybe read it yourself without listening to me waffling on. But let's look at some of the key features or the technique of this paragraph before we look at the content of it. So I've started with on the one hand, which is me trying to tell the examiner, here's one side of the argument, this paragraph, and in a minute, in my second paragraph, I'm going to give you another example or another side or another hand. On the other hand, so the challenge of her legitimacy at the start of the reign was significant. So what I've done in the opening sentence is I've picked legitimacy as the focus of this paragraph, and I've said how it was very significant. So I've got some judgment in there. Everything she wants to do as monarch would be impossible if she did not have the authority of a legitimate ruler. It also makes all of her other issues at the start even more challenging. So I am saying to the examiner that I appreciate and I understand that legitimacy is a problem, and I'm now going to go on and saying why. In 1558, 90% of England is Catholic, as is the country officially following the reign of Mary I. They don't want Elizabeth to be queen as she is Protestant. Many of the Catholics in the country don't recognise the marriage of Anne Boleyn to Henry VIII. So you can see if you read that bit on, we're just going to tell that little bit of a story there about the illegitimacy of Elizabeth, how she is essentially a bastard child because she was born out of wedlock, because many of the Catholics don't accept the first marriage ever ended. And that's insignificant as 90% of the country are Catholic. That means 90% of the country probably believe that. So you could read that bit yourself there, just telling that bit of a story. See how you wrote your story. What was your version of this marriage not being accepted? How did you write yours? Was it clearer? Was it like mine? Was it better than mine? So just see if you've got the nuts and bolts of the facts of that little story there, and we're going to get some marks for that. And then I'm going on to say there, so just in the middle, just underneath the middle of the paragraph, it is therefore clear that Elizabeth couldn't do anything as monarch with the challenge, this challenge of being illegitimate. That's why it was important. Finally, if her legitimacy was to be questioned, it would open the door for Mary Queen of Scots to become Queen of England. So I've introduced Mary Queen of Scots now as another angle to this legitimacy thing. This is a significant challenge for Elizabeth, as Mary is a legitimate Tudor and is Catholic, so the majority of the country would be much happier. Mary Queen of Scots is also half French, offering a strong alliance to England, or worse, enhancing the challenges faced by France. And then this is going to support my little introduction bit here. So within the legitimacy paragraph, hopefully now with this last bit, you can see that I'm actually saying, yeah, okay, all of that is true, it's a challenge, but I am now arguing with you, examiner, why I think it's less. So I've said, hence, why I believe the war with France is a bigger challenge. However, the people believe in divine right monarchy, so whether they see her as legitimate or not is irrelevant in her eyes, as if they challenge her, they are challenging God too, and they can't do that. Furthermore, Henry reinstated Elizabeth's claim. So I've sort of put a bit at the end there, like a mini conclusion really. Overall, despite the reasons why legitimacy is a challenge in the paragraph, I've clearly ended it there, I think, with a little argument as to why it's not the most. The idea about divine right monarchy, that's probably more hope than judgment really. I don't know if that's what she thought, but it's certainly a valid argument, isn't it, that they might moan and tut in the pubs and the taverns, but they have to accept Elizabeth, because otherwise it would suggest that divine right monarchy, that God has chosen wrong. Maybe she does know that. Maybe that's why this is less of a problem for her. All right. So I've tried to say in the paragraph why legitimacy is an issue, but then I've ended it saying why I think the war with France is still more important, but also I've sort of countered a little bit as to why legitimacy might not be so big. Hopefully you can see that in this paragraph, and have a look at your own as well and see what you think of that one. All right. So then we can go on to paragraph 2, or challenge 2. It's going to be the war with France that I have picked in this case, because that's the one I think is the biggest reason. So the content that we want to try and include with this is obviously a little bit more straightforward, because it's clearly a war with France. France being the second most powerful country in Europe behind Spain, Elizabeth knows she cannot fight. She can't beat France. She hasn't got an army herself. She's got no money. The country's bankrupt. So this is why this makes this war even more dangerous. if they were to invade, England would be defeated very, very easily in this early stages of her reign. I want to also bring in this paragraph the Old Alliance, this ancient alliance between France and Scotland. This is even more dangerous due to the fact that Scotland could be a backdoor entry into England, and this is proven with the fact that Marie de Guise is in Scotland at the time. She could just march south at any moment. All right, this is also going to support the previous point about Mary Queen of Scots having a legit claim, the fact that this could happen overnight. Marie de Guise could march down into England to support her daughter's claim to the throne. So hopefully you can see already just the argument where we're going with this. The cost of the war is also crippling England even further, meaning that the problems that she's facing there are being worsened. And also France and Spain have just signed the peace treaty, which makes a joint French-Spanish Catholic invasion very, very possible. All that said, hopefully we can see in a paragraph why that's important, is why I think this war with France is an issue. Remember, the war with France is an issue. Whether or not you think it's bigger than legitimacy is up to you. But now we've done paragraph 1, we can now compare directly back to that in the next 2 paragraphs. So again, our overall paragraph, again, I'll flick through the bits that I think are important, especially structure. Pause the video to read it yourself without me waffling on, and then compare to your own. So we'll start again with on the other hand. So I am telling the examiner here is another argument taking me away from legitimacy, and I'm making it very clear what this paragraph is about. Elizabeth has inherited the war with France. This was a significant challenge to her at the beginning of her reign and was much more dangerous than her legitimacy. So not only have I set up this paragraph into what it's going to be about, but I've also given another judgment. I've reminded the examiner what I think in relation to my introduction, that this is more important or more dangerous than legitimacy. This war with France was a clear and present danger to Elizabeth, even if every single person in the country believed she was legitimate, and arguably even if she was a man. The threat from France adding to the crippled economy and no standing army would have been overwhelming. So I've brought a little bit of analysis in there that I've said even if Elizabeth was a man, she still would have lost this thing, sort of negating the problem of being a woman, gender or legitimacy. I've then gone on to say, to make matters worse, there was a French army headed by Marie de Guise in Scotland, ready to move at a moment's notice. Scotland and France had an ancient alliance known as the Old Alliance, which could make Scotland a backdoor entry into England. This was the reality faced by Elizabeth at the start of her reign. Marie de Guise might also be willing to invade England in 1558 to support her daughter Mary Queen of Scots' claim to the throne of England, which is even more significant as previously stated she's Catholic and may be seen as a more legitimate queen than Elizabeth, meaning that invasion could be supported widely. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about trying to reinforce my point to the examiner. This is why I think it's more important that Elizabeth deals with France as a priority, as well as having no army or money. The cost of war continues to rise, with Elizabeth needing to raise taxes, which is further upsetting her people and meaning they would be willing to have Elizabeth removed. Finally, France and Spain, Spain had been traditionally England's ally thanks to Mary and Philip, had recently signed a peace treaty making the threat of a joint Catholic invasion possible. All of this clearly shows why the war with France and all of its potential is a much bigger challenge than a legitimacy. So again, I'm reinforcing to the examiner my line of argument, and I keep saying why the war with France is bigger, and I'm going to keep pushing that because that's my point that I'm trying to convince the examiner. You would push your point, wouldn't you, depending on whatever you think. If Elizabeth ends the war with France, she will improve the economy, rid Marie de Guise from France, and stronger relations with France would be ideal to avoid conflict with Spain. So again, I'm trying to reinforce this idea about why France is a bigger issue. So look at this again, look at my one, look at yours if you chose the war with France as a paragraph. See what you could have written, maybe if you could have added a bit more detail. Maybe some of you have mentioned these things but a little bit more implied, so you've assumed the examiner knows what you mean. Remember to always tell them exactly what you mean. And then we'll have a look at challenge 3 or paragraph 3. Religion in this case. So in my model answer, I picked religion as a key paragraph to compare to legitimacy. So in this paragraph, we want to talk about obviously the religious roller coaster of the last 20 to 30 years, the chaos of going from Catholic to Protestant, the idea that Henry VIII's Reformation brought major disruption, breaking away from the Pope's rule from Rome, which obviously many of the country, 90% of them, are in conflict with who's in charge. They want to see the Pope as the head of the church, but also they believe in their monarch too, thanks to divine right. So this is the sort of detail we need. Edward VI was extreme Protestant, Catholic, extreme Catholic under Mary, and now back to Protestant under Elizabeth. The people are just not sure. They're not sure what's going to go on. They're ready to sort of fight at the drop of a hat now. They're so fed up with the whole thing that if Elizabeth gets this wrong, we're in trouble. We clearly want to bring in our 284 fact of the Protestants being burnt by Mary. But just the point about why this is a challenge is more of a potential challenge or threat to Elizabeth, that the country is like a powder keg waiting to go off at any point, particularly the volume of Catholics in the country. All right, so please keep that in mind as well as Elizabeth with that too. And also the fact that there's been a religious civil war in France, which Elizabeth's concerned could inspire one in England as well. And as previously mentioned with this one, because we've done paragraph 1 being legitimacy and the focus of the question, it should now make it easier in this paragraph to refer back to things that we maybe previously said. So, as always, again, pause the video, read it at your own speed, comparing it to yours directly, but I'll just talk you through the paragraph and try and point out the things that I've tried to do technique-wise. So I've said, however, another challenge to Elizabeth in 1558 was the religious chaos in England. So I have, again, hopefully shown that the examiner is seeing a third reason now, or a third challenge, and this paragraph is going to be about religious chaos. England was on the brink of a religious civil war, possibly inspired by a similar one in France. So a nice little fact there about France. Since Henry VIII's Reformation taking power from the Pope, England had swung from Catholic to Protestant under Edward VI, back to Catholic under Mary I, and now back to Protestant under Elizabeth. So I've got that bit of the story, and I've got the roller coaster in, nice and easy, nice easy marks. And then I'm going to explain why that's a problem though. Some of you just said about the roller coaster, but not really why it's a challenge. Therefore, the people were angry and confused and would not tolerate a similarly extreme religious change as the previous two. Edward VI was very Protestant, destroying the remaining monasteries, and Mary I was arguably worse by burning 284 innocent Protestants in her 5 years in power. So some nice knowledge there, isn't there, that is definitely going to explain the situation and impress the examiner. If Elizabeth got this wrong, so I'm making a judgment call here and a bit of analysis, then it wouldn't have mattered about the war with France or illegitimacy. The civil war would have finished her reign. The fact that Elizabeth dealt with religion so quickly, again, a little bit of an opinion here, a little bit of an inference perhaps, passing religious settlement within a year of her reign suggests that she too recognised the danger of religious chaos and dealt with it. It cannot be understated how important this was. Bear in mind 90% of the country were Catholic and battling with their loyalty to the Queen and the Pope. Furthermore, everyone in 1558 was religious, and religion formed the basis of their entire lives. As can be seen from the religious roller coaster, people were willing to fight, kill and die for their religion. I think religion was a very serious challenge for Elizabeth, far more important than legitimacy. So again, I've made the judgment in there pretty much because if people are willing to kill, fight and die, then they're willing to do anything, aren't they? So again, reinforcing why I think this is more important than legitimacy. This is also because people had to accept her legitimacy due to divine right, but they would be less willing to accept another brutal religious swing. It is even more dangerous to Elizabeth because of the war with France and Marie de Guise almost standing by to support this potential religious civil war, adding to why I think the war with France is a bigger challenge as it makes everything else worse. So again, I'm sort of like hopefully a bit of a dog with a bone here. I'm just not losing my point. I keep coming back to France. France is my argument is the biggest challenge she faced, and hopefully you can see that in this paragraph. And I brought it right back at the very end, but I'm also focused on the question by saying that it was not legitimacy. All right, so they're my sort of 3 paragraphs, and normally we go into conclusion now, but just in case you pick some of the other things to talk about, I've done a couple of model paragraphs for the other challenges, so we'll quickly look at them as well, and then the conclusion, and then we'll do the Northern Rebellion. All right, so paragraph or challenge 4, gender, marriage and key content. So this is another one. Most of you did do gender or marriage, or a sort of trying a mixture of both. In a paragraph like this, you could probably do both. So remember, in the 16th century, it was viewed as unnatural for a woman to rule. They were supposed to be dutiful wives and mothers, especially a queen. Her duty is to have a son and continue the dynasty. When she marries, she would pass on the role of monarch, blah, blah, blah. So we want to get that point in there. This is how women are viewed at the time. So this idea we've got this queen on the throne as a woman, people don't want it. There were loads of religious preachers. Remember, everyone's religious, so they would listen to what their preachers are saying every Sunday. But John Knox in particular blamed women, Eve, for eating the apple, saying that women therefore are unfit to rule because they just make silly decisions and choices, and they were subservient to men. Also, it's argued that women could not lead an army into battle. Although Mary was the queen, obviously she married Philip, and he would have done that. And Mary has also not covered herself in glory as a woman, which is added to the idea of gender being a problem, because Mary's kind of proven that women maybe weren't so good. So ending the war with France would also reinforce this view that a woman was weak and cowardly. Also part of the problem maybe why Elizabeth can't do this quite so easily. All right, and then we want to think about bringing a close to this paragraph now. There's loads to see, obviously, with the content you could pick here. Gender was a big deal, as the calls, wasn't such a big deal, because they were quite happy to have Mary Queen of Scots. So maybe that they weren't bothered so much by gender in the end anyway. That'd be a nice little argument. And also, she's only 25, Elizabeth, when she becomes queen, so she's got plenty of time to have a child and to get married. So it's not an imminent danger, I would say, which is what I would argue in the essay if I chose this paragraph. All right, and as always, clearly we are referring back to legitimacy. All right, so this is just an extra one if you chose to pick this. So you can pause the video and have a little look through this one yourself. Similar kind of things. Opening sentence hopefully is really clear. Read this paragraph yourself, compare to yours if you did that. Maybe you could even see some improvements in this. One thing I probably would do to improve this paragraph when you read it is bring in the idea that she's got plenty of time to get married. That really would reinforce the idea why it's not so much of a challenge to her, because she's got ages. She's got at least 10 years, hasn't she? If we're talking about, I don't know, 1569 and she's still not married, then we might start seeing this being a problem as she's getting less likely able to have a child. So pause the video, have a little read this one in regards to gender, and then move on to the next one. All right, so challenge 5, I'm going to bring in the economy and the harvest. Again, if you pick this one, you might have picked this one because in your paper, the 12 marker might have triggered some ideas. It could also get a bit messy though. In this case, you could get a bit confused. So let's focus on the start of the reign. Remember, she's inherited a debt of 300,000 from her sister. The country is bankrupt. The cost of the war is making that even worse. We want to be getting that in, don't we? There's been terrible harvests in the 1550s. 60s and 70s, but we don't need the 50s, 60s and 70s in this question, do we? Because we're only talking about 1558, the start of her reign. But she has inherited this bad harvest and bad economy from her sister. Although that nice little fact about in the year she becomes queen, there's a great harvest, and everyone's like, oh, clearly God wants Elizabeth on the throne. In order to deal with this economy, she stops public spending, calls in her debts, which upsets the nobles. Some of these debts went back 300-400 years ago. Some of them to the Norman conquest. So the nobles, the Duke of Norfolk or whatever, previous Dukes of Norfolk owed the crown, the monarch, a debt. And Elizabeth's called that in now, which obviously is going to cause a little bit of tension with those nobles. First day on the job, probably not the best way to introduce yourself to them, is it? And she's also raising taxes, which is making the whole thing worse. So you can clearly see why the economy and the harvest and the taxes is also a problem at the start of her reign. Probably a little bit similar, I guess, to what Stresemann inherited in the Germany course. Had to deal with those problems first, didn't he? All right, so again, paragraph or challenge 5, model answer. Pause the video, see the bits you're looking for yourself. The opening sentence, is there a judgment? Is it clear what the paragraph's about? Have I compared back and forth to legitimacy? By this time, this is the 5th paragraph we've talked about. Hopefully you can see and maybe compare to yours if you chose this. All right, but remember, overall, we only need 3. So pause the video, have a read of this paragraph, and then we'll have a look at a conclusion for this question. All right, so this is a conclusion, obviously vital, and this is why you need to spend more time with this question. It has to have a conclusion, and it's probably the most important bit of the whole essay, really. It's where we're going to sum up our argument, the things we've said in the essay, summarise, but keep going back to the idea of this question and focus, which is legitimacy. So I have said, in conclusion, it is clear that Elizabeth faced many challenges at the start of her reign, all of them significant. So I'm accepting that they're all significant. However, I personally disagree that her legitimacy was the biggest challenge. So I've said it again, there's no doubt, the examiners in no doubt what I think. Whilst it is obvious that if her legitimacy was questioned, it would undermine her authority and she couldn't rule effectively, the fact that there was a general belief in divine right monarchy meant that people would accept her and not do as not doing what would have been a challenge in God's choice. They would have obviously upset God as well and gone to hell. So that's why I'm sort of cutting it short that legitimacy isn't, because they believe in divine right monarchy. I believe the war with France was the most significant, as this was an immediate danger. So I'm sort of reiterating what I've said in the essay, that this war could happen instantly, or this invasion could happen instantly. There was a French army in Scotland and England was bankrupt. Invasion would have been quick and easy. The war with France also added to the threat from Mary, Queen of Scots' claim to the throne, supported by Marie de Guise. So I'm just sort of summarising what I've said in my essay. And then furthermore, the economic issues in the country were worsened because of this war, clearly showing that war was impacting everything. The religious chaos and potential civil war was also a bigger challenge to Elizabeth than her legitimacy. So I'm judging again there, but I'm saying why even religion, whilst it's second in my opinion, is not as important as the war. But she dealt with this quickly and probably relied on the fact that she had some time to show the people that she was more moderate. Hopefully you can see in that conclusion there, I've made it really clear why I think war with France was, but I've also tried to put a bit in there about why the other two weren't as important. But there's clearly a ranking there, isn't there? Quite obvious. It's gone from war with France number 1, religion number 2, and legitimacy number 3. Okay, so hopefully that makes clear, and obviously your conclusion totally changes depending on what you said in your introduction. Make sure you don't change your mind. The conclusion should be the same. Your line of argument should have gone all the way through the essay. Okay, so that's quite a tricky essay, really. A nice one because there's loads to talk about, but it's the language of the thing. So now we'll get ourselves ready to look at the Northern Rebellion, which I think is much more straightforward, a bit more fun as well, really, in arguing the causes of it. All right, so that would be hopefully enough of that said there. Make sure you check in your own answers before we move on, and then let's get on to the Northern Rebellion if you chose this one. Then look at the feedback. If you didn't choose this one, then watch this video anyway, just to remind you or get you practicing the idea of this one. So this question is saying to you, the statement is that religion was the main cause of the Northern Rebellion. Again, the statement is very clear. You will have to pick 2 other causes of the Northern Rebellion in this. So your 3 paragraphs, but religion is the focus. Remember, we need our 30 minutes. So some general overall content to think about in this one. As previously, write something. We don't need to go on about that anymore. Just write something about the bullet points. Linking back, again, using those words, accentuated, worsened, increased, all helps to tie your essay together. We need our judgment. We need to be saying if we agree that religion, in this case, was most or least of the cause. 3 paragraphs, causes being number 1, and then any 2 others. So we need to make sure that we're following the same kind of structure. Okay, very clear opening sentence, again, signposting in each paragraph. On the one hand, religion is a significant cause of the Northern Rebellion, and then that's your paragraph, and so forth. Similar to the previous 16 marker feedback, our bullet points, we get the 2, we need a third of our own. We'll have a look at what they might be in a minute. And keep referring back to the question. In this case, we must be constantly referring to religion as the main cause or not. And if it's not, what is and why. Okay, so structure-wise, exactly the same. Always the same as the medicine paper as well for the 16 marker. The sooner we get this technique nailed, then all we really need to worry about is the content that we include in our answers. Okay, so let's begin with some overall. The bullet points that you get given are religion, obviously. Also, we could consider as well perhaps the political interference, I don't know, and then the third one of your own probably would be obvious to be Mary Queen of Scots. It's quite straightforward in that case that there isn't really more than 3, whereas on the legitimacy question that we've just talked about, well, there's 5 or 6 possible challenges, whereas this, you've got religion, politics, and Mary Queen of Scots. All right, so let's get cracking then on seeing the overall issues with this question. But the things that we should be considering before you start writing this answer, you need to get your head around some context. Again, that contextual knowledge of the period. And this is really more important in this kind of question. We want to be thinking what's happened by 1569 that might have triggered this rebellion now. Why 1569 and not 1559? So the following is really important. Just take your time to read this bit with me and get your head around it before we start writing this question. All right, so in 1566 to about 1568, there's the issuing of the papal bull, which essentially began excommunicating Elizabeth, which obviously in 1570. But the messages coming from Rome are that they're telling English Catholics to stop going to Elizabeth's churches. Okay, so from about 1566 onwards, the Catholics in England are starting to have conflicting opinions. They're being told by the Pope, almost given permission by the Pope, to rebel, to become recusants. Whereas perhaps before the Pope did this, they would have been scared to do that because they were worried about not going to heaven or something. So that is a key change in the context as to why this rebellion may have taken place and also why religion might be the issue. But also Elizabeth has been interfering with the nobles for years, since she became queen. So this is maybe like something that they now are just getting to the point where they're just fed up. And it's one last thing that's triggered this rebellion because of all the other stuff that she's been doing. And this also, again, contextually is really, really important. Mary Queen of Scots is now in England. She arrived in England the year previously. Maybe that's the trigger that they were waiting for, the northern nobles. Maybe arguing why Mary Queen of Scots was clearly the biggest cause of this rebellion. But the fact that she is now in the country changes everything, doesn't it? Before she was in Scotland, sort of at arm's length. Now she's in the country. Sussex has been put in charge of the Council of the North in 1568, just a year before. Was that the trigger? All of this interference from Elizabeth, as you'll see in the essay, was the Council of the North really undermining their power, and then by putting a southerner in charge, really adding salt to the wound and insulting them? I don't know. These are all things to consider in this essay. The northern nobles have also had some of their lands taken off them, including the copper mines, which really angered Northumberland, financially affecting them. So maybe that's a reason why they've started this little rebellion, or sorry, potentially big rebellion. And this is now 10 years into Elizabeth's reign. So unlike what we've just said in the legitimacy essay, the fact is that she's got plenty of time in 1558 to have a baby and get married, so less of an immediate challenge. She's now 10 years on. She's 35 years old. She's still not married. So there's an anxiety that she's not going to be able to have a child, and who's going to take over? What's the succession? All people really wanted in this country was a smooth succession, a line to the next monarch, and Elizabeth has not given them that, which is obviously adding to the problem of why Mary Queen of Scots, by this point, is more dangerous, because she now does have the son that Elizabeth doesn't, and she had that son in 1566, so 3 years before the rebellion. You could argue that now that she's got an heir, and now she's in the country, now is why the rebellion took place in 1569, maybe arguably saying that Mary Queen of Scots was the biggest reason. I don't believe that, but this is stuff that you could maybe include. And also, the religious settlement was 10 years earlier, widely and mostly accepted, so perhaps you could counter the religious argument by saying if it was religion, then surely they'd have invaded or had the rebellion 10 years earlier after the settlement. So this page now that we're on is really important for this essay question that we're doing now, but also your knowledge of this topic. And this is where revision is so important. It's one thing knowing some facts in history, but you really are going to get your top marks by understanding the bigger picture. Lots of people sort of moan a little bit or worry about the dates. Maybe moan's the wrong word, but worry about the dates in history. There's so many dates. There are loads of dates, but more importantly than the dates is that you're understanding what's happening around these events, sort of just either side of the events. That's what you're getting marked on, not knowing when things were. So you could quite clearly forget that James was born in 1566, as long as you're saying that Mary Queen of Scots had recently had a son, and it's around about this time, then you're going to get rewarded for that. So just take the time before we move on looking at the essay to get your head around this little blue box on the screen, especially as the Northern Rebellion would be a very, very lovely topic to discuss in our exam. So introduction wise, similar to the previous one, I'm going to give you two possible introductions with a judgment. The first one is mine. This is what I personally believe. So again, I have said I disagree to a larger extent, so there's the judgment straight away, that religion was the biggest cause of the Northern Rebellion. And then I've gone on to say what I think was the biggest cause. I believe that political interference was the biggest cause. This is because, and a little thesis statement, a little bit of a why, this is because it was a rebellion led by nobles, not the masses, which might have been the case if it was motivated by religion. Religion and Mary Queen of Scots were significant causes, just not the biggest cause. So I've said to the examiner, I'm going to talk about religion and Mary Queen of Scots as well in this essay, but I believe that political interference was the biggest. Hopefully you can see why that's really nice and clear. An alternative introduction, if you want to agree, perhaps, is I've said I agree to a larger extent that religion was the biggest cause of the Northern Rebellion. And then a bit of a thesis statement, a little bit of a why. This is because the majority of the country were Catholic, and it isn't a coincidence that the rebellion came so close to the papal bull, essentially giving the people the permission that they hadn't previously had. Political interference and Mary Queen of Scots were significant causes, just not the biggest cause. So again, I'm saying that I'm going to talk about political and Mary in this essay, but I actually do agree that religion was, and a little bit of a thesis statement as to why. Though we don't want to go on waffling for hours in the introduction about religion, because we'll do that in the religion paragraph. But hopefully you can see from these two examples a nice, clear, straightforward introduction. The introduction is really important. Make sure we get this bit right, okay, especially for this 16 marker in Elizabeth and in medicine. All right, so let's start with paragraph 1 then, religion. So again, as previously with the legitimacy question, we'll start with the content that you should really be including in a paragraph about religion as a cause of the Northern Rebellion. So they want to re-establish Catholicism in the north. Remember that Elizabeth has passed the settlement making England Protestant in 1559. They want to make England Catholic again. The fact that they have the Mass in Durham Cathedral, the Catholic Mass with transubstantiation, and the rebels wore Catholic badges and emblems, it clearly is good evidence that this is a religious rebellion. Why else would they be marching through the streets with religious emblems? Philip is also supporting this, as is the Pope, in this idea of the Counter-Reformation. That's the point of it, isn't it? That the Pope has issued this Counter-Reformation, put Philip in charge of getting rid of Protestantism from around Europe, and arguably the rebellion comes a couple of years after the first papal bull in 66 through to 68. These letters, these bulls being sent from Rome encouraging the English Catholics not to go to her churches, just seems a bit more than just a coincidence that the rebellion happens after the Pope gets involved. And these are all the things that you want to try and be arguing. 1/3 of recusants in the country were northern nobles. So you want to be considering that as another trigger, religious-wise. That means that they're not going to church, are they? So that's a huge amount of nobles, and the fact that they're from the north shows this is a religious rebellion. And at this point, obviously, most of the north was Catholic. Well, 90% of the country, but definitely the north is Catholic. So we've got quite a lot so far. And then finally, just a little bit extra, is that the rebels wanted Mary Queen of Scots named as the heir. Again, she's Catholic, so we could argue that slant. This blue box here shows you the gist of what you want to probably try and include in a paragraph on religion. Remember that religion is the focus, so we're going to say all the reasons why religion is important, but also at the end of this paragraph saying why it is or why it is less important than something else, just setting up the next one. But remember, as we previously said, don't write off religion or any of the other ones as in not important, because they're all important causes. Your job as a historian is to say which is the most, and it doesn't have to be massively more, it can be slightly more, as long as you are making a judgment and not sitting on the fence. Okay, so let's see how this might look in practice then. So as previously with the legitimacy essay, or if you're just watching this one because this is the one that you did for now, let's start the paragraph with a nice clear opening. On the one hand, so this tells the examiner this paragraph is going to, I'm starting my essay with this view. I've said religion was a very significant cause of the Northern Rebellion. That tells me that this paragraph is about religion. Okay, in 1566, around 66-68, the Pope had told the English Catholics to stop going to Elizabeth's Church of England. This was part of his Counter-Reformation, to remove all heretics and Protestants from Europe and turn England back to a Catholic country. So again, we've got that nice little fact in there that it starts after the papal bull, because they didn't do it before that, did they? The fact that the Pope had told them to do this so close to the rebellion shows that religion was important in this rebellion. They had essentially been given permission by the Pope, who they saw as their leader. The northern nobles were Catholic and wanted to turn the north, at least, back Catholic, following the religious settlement in 1559, 10 years earlier. 1/3 of the nobility were recusants, refusing to accept Elizabeth's new religious settlement. One of the ways the nobles made this a religious rebellion was by holding the Catholic Mass in Durham Cathedral, a very public defiance of Elizabeth's settlement. The rebellion also saw them and their rebels wear Catholic badges and emblems. Again, I'm adding those nice little facts in there to show this is a religious rebellion. Further to this, Philip II and the Pope both supported this plot, clearly showing it had religious causes, as they are promoting the Counter-Reformation and encouraging the northern earls to rebel. We're going to have a bit of analysis now. I'm going to do a bit of that sort of argumentative language that we keep talking about. So I'm going to say, it is clear, therefore, that the Northern Rebellion had religious causes, as they had a Catholic Mass en route to England and had Catholic badges. And it isn't a coincidence that this happened so close to the papal bull being issued. I don't believe religion was the main cause, however, as if it was, surely, this is that language, that analytical language, they would have rebelled much closer to the religious settlement 10 years earlier. In fact, the majority of the country followed the settlement, and 2/3 of the nobles, maybe not necessarily northern nobles, but 2/3 of the nobles did also follow it, meaning religion wasn't the main cause. So we could focus all day long on 1/3 of the nobles being recusants and all those things we've said, and you could, if you agree with religion, then you would just slightly end this paragraph a little bit differently, and you would say why all of these things clearly show why religion is the main cause. I believe personally that it was important for all the reasons that we've said, but wasn't the main. So I'm going to hopefully go on to paragraph 2 now, which will be what I think is the biggest cause. It helps me to do paragraph 2 after paragraph 1. Being religion is the focus of the question, I can now keep comparing back to religion. Alright, so political interference, in my opinion, was the reason for the Northern Rebellion. So some of the content we might want to include in this is that they believe that the councillors who advise the Queen, Cecil in particular, they hate him. The Northern nobles hate him. He's low-born, he's not even noble, and he's advising the Queen, and all the things she does, they're blaming him for. They felt they were losing power and influence. Northumberland lost his role as the Warden of the Middlemarch and defending the border. That was always Northumberland's role, the title, not necessarily the man. So to have that taken away was a bit of a slap in the face, really. Another dig at his power. Also, they're losing power a little bit, Northumberland and Westmoreland, particularly at court, whereas under Mary they were very, very powerful. So they're just losing their power. The Council of the North in 1568 to govern the North under Sussex. Not only are they taking power away from the Northern nobles, this Council of the North to manage the Northerners, who'd been allowed to do whatever they wanted previously under Mary's reign and before, but to put a Southerner in charge, the Earl of Sussex, really just was further insult that they just couldn't handle anymore. This is why I believe that political interference is the last straw. It was just one thing after the other, and in the end they just snapped. 1568, funnily enough, the year before the rebellion, the Council of the North arguably was the trigger. Elizabeth had taken land from the Northern nobles. The Northumberland had lost its copper mines, leading to financial loss. All of this, again, as we keep saying, we're building up a bit of a picture here how Elizabeth has constantly been affecting them and undermining them since she's been in power. Hence, maybe why it's a bigger problem and a bigger issue. And then finally, Elizabeth has summoned the earls to court. They are obviously thinking, oh my God, we're in trouble now. We're going to go to prison or she's going to execute us. So do you know what? We'd be as well just rebelling and going down with a fight. Encouraged by the wives as well. Now that is a sort of fluffy little bit, the wives bit, but it is a fair point to make. If they figured they were going to die anyway, that's probably why it was a trigger. And that, regardless of the motivation, that's politics, isn't it? That's a political interference. So keeping all that in mind, remember we're trying to compare back to religion. So we want to say in this paragraph why this was important, but then also you need to be getting your point across at the end of the paragraph why it was more or less important than religion. Okay, so let's have a look at our model paragraph for this one. On the contrary, so I'm flipping my argument aside. I'm saying to the examiner, here's a different argument altogether than religion in paragraph 1. So political interference was critical in the cause of the Northern Rebellion, more important than religion. So I've made my judgment in that first sentence and I've made it clear what this paragraph is going to be about. So let me start with one reason why the Northern nobles rebelled against Elizabeth in 1569 was due to them being upset politically. Firstly, the Northern nobles hated Elizabeth's advisors. They blamed them for Elizabeth making some of the decisions she had so far in their reign. They referred to them as evil counsellors. Maybe it could be better to put Cecil's name in there. But again, we've made the point, and I think we've made the point quite well. Furthermore, so that means I'm adding an extra bit of knowledge now, the Northern nobles felt that they were losing their power and influence not only in their own county, but also at court and in the Privy Council. Traditionally, the Northern nobles had been left alone to govern the North as they saw fit, especially by Elizabeth's sister Mary. An example of them losing power would be Northumberland losing his role as the Warden of the Middlemarch and the borders. So a powerful role that was always there to keep the Scots out had been a long-standing position from the Earl of Northumberland. Elizabeth again has taken that away. So I'm adding some facts as to what she's doing that's upsetting the nobles. As well as this, Elizabeth set up the Council of the North in 1568 to govern the North under the Earl of Sussex, a Southerner, which further limited the power of the Northern nobles and infuriated them more by being run by a Southerner. They felt insulted. So again, I've now got the Council of the North in there. So we can hopefully see we've got loads of examples so far. Evil councillors, Warden of the Middlemarches, and the Council of the North. And we haven't even talked about the copper mines yet. Remember, we only need 3 really. So if time is an issue, we could probably see in this paragraph we've got more than we need. But if we can do something like this, we're going to get our fact marks, aren't we? Furthermore, Elizabeth had confiscated land from the Northern Earls. For example, she took away Northumberland's copper mines, leading him to financial losses. Finally, the Earls had been summoned to court, which they saw as a danger, so they rebelled, and they possibly had nothing to lose. These reasons are more important than religion because Elizabeth had been interfering for a long time, and the Council of the North the previous year was just the final straw and the trigger for the rebellion in 1569. All right, I do think probably looking at this paragraph, there's a bit more in there than we need. We only need 3, and I think there's 5 good political facts, but you can see you could leave some of those out depending on what you know most about. But if we, as a revision video, can get more in, then all we're doing here is essentially trying to get us ready for the exam. And in real life, if you forget a few bits, that's fine, because we should hopefully get the 3. Hopefully, if you pause the video and just read this one yourself, compare to your paragraph that you did about politics, see what you wrote, see where you've got ticks, see where you maybe have got a little bit of extra detail to add, and hopefully you can see in mine where you might be able to improve. All right, so that's the second one, and I have made reference to the religion as well. So let's move on to the third and final reason for the rebellion. We're going to say Mary Queen of Scots. So the content you want to include in this would be quite straightforward. The succession is the key motivation for this rebellion. Clearly, the rebels wanted to marry Norfolk to Mary Queen of Scots, so tell that story. Even Dudley, who's a Puritan, a Protestant, and is Elizabeth's favourite, even he is quite happy to support this Norfolk to Mary marriage. That's treasonous, that's crazy. However, it shows, doesn't it, just how important everybody views the succession as. And this is why perhaps Mary Queen of Scots is in fact the real reason for the Northern Rebellion. She's also just had a child, remember, 3 years earlier, a boy, crucially. So she's got an heir and a son, legitimising her claim even more. Perhaps they didn't rebel in Mary's name earlier because she didn't have an heir. Whereas now she does have an heir, maybe that's what's triggered them. Elizabeth, as we've said, is getting older and has still no sign of a husband, so Mary is seeming a really nice option here. But furthermore, they just want Mary named as the successor, proving that that's what they wanted, that Mary is the figurehead of this whole rebellion. They're going to go on this rebellion and force Elizabeth to accept Mary, to name Mary as the heir, not necessarily replace Elizabeth. That definitely proves that Mary Queen of Scots is in fact the cause of this rebellion. And then looking at bullet point 2, considering she's had the son, Mary, again being the point of the rebellion, is to release her from prison. She's got her son, but she's also in the country by 1568. So 66, she has a boy and an heir. Elizabeth's getting older, and 68, Mary arrives in England. What a coincidence. Too many coincidences there, you might argue. I feel like it's hard to argue that they're just coincidences. And that, of course, Mary Queen of Scots is not the main reason for this rebellion. No, I don't believe she is, as you know from my introduction in paragraph 2. I really believe politics is the reason. But with all this said, you can clearly put a nice, strong argument forward now for why Mary Queen of Scots was the reason for the rebellion, and compare back to paragraph 1. Always going back to religion, the focus of the question. So let's see our Mary paragraph and see what you think of this. A final significant cause of the Northern Rebellion was Mary Queen of Scots. So I've said what this paragraph's about, Mary Queen of Scots, and then I've got a bit of analysis in here. I believe her to be a greater cause than religion due to the timing of her arrival and the rebellion, although she supports the religious issues, but not as important as the political grievances of the Earls. So straight away the examiner knows what I think. I'm reminding them what I think, having this train of thought throughout the essay. But I'm also accepting that Mary is a problem, is a real legit cause. Firstly, the rebellion took place just 1 year after Mary arrived in England. This cannot be a coincidence. They clearly saw Mary as an opportunity and a figurehead for their plot. A significant part of the plot was to marry Mary to the Duke of Norfolk, also demanding that Mary be named as Elizabeth's heir. Both Norfolk and Mary have legitimate claims to the throne through blood, so this marriage would be seen as a very strong and legitimate in bringing about a smooth succession, something that is important to the people that Elizabeth had so far failed to secure. The fact that Dudley, Elizabeth's favourite, and the Protestants supported this marriage shows that the smooth succession is craved by the people, clearly showing why Mary was a bigger cause than religion, strengthened by the fact that she had just had James, a son and natural successor, in 1566. So I'm keep coming back to that point about how Mary is perfect. For want of a better term, thinking of modern times, Mary is an oven-ready deal, isn't she? She could go in there, the succession could be secured overnight. She's Catholic, win-win for everybody. It sounds to me like I might actually want to be doing a rebellion now that we've got Mary in the country. We're going to try and free her from this prison. Furthermore, they wanted to free Mary from her imprisonment at the hands of Elizabeth, again showing that Mary was indeed a significant cause of the rebellion. Remember, we're not trying to say that she wasn't, we're just trying to argue whether she was the most. They felt that Mary was innocent and should not be being held against her will. This again shows that Mary was a pivotal reason for this rebellion. Whether Mary was in on the plot or not doesn't really matter. It is clear that she is the figurehead for the rebellion because they are planning on freeing her and marrying her to the Duke of Norfolk, forming a formidable and legitimate alliance against Elizabeth. This is more important than religion because the rebellion took place so soon after Mary's arrival in England, showing it was no coincidence but the moment they had been waiting for. Alright, so again, maybe pause the video, have a little read of that again without me rabbiting on. compare to your Mary paragraph, see how much detail you included, see if you think I've got too much, and obviously talk to us about this if you do think that's the case when you get your papers back. But just hopefully you can see that there's 3 facts in there, and we've tried to explain why they are a problem, why is that a cause, but also we're trying to analyse a little bit, saying why they're more or less important than religion, and obviously our other idea, in this case, political. So with the 3rd paragraph now done, we can have a look at our conclusion. So this is what I believe, how I would sum this up. Again, conclusion being really, really vital for the 16 marker. In conclusion, it is clear that religion is significant as a cause of the Northern Rebellion in 1569 due to the clear public showing of a Catholic Mass at Durham and the banners showing the wounds of Christ. I think restoring Catholicism would have been a bonus following the political grievances being dealt with had the rebellion been successful. So I've given a bit of a judgment there. I think they're not doing it for religion, but that would have been nice. Also, if religion was the main cause, then clearly they would have rebelled 10 years earlier after the settlement. Instead of the majority of the country, nobles and peasants got on with the settlement, at least publicly. So I've shut that argument down straight away, and I have made a killer point, I think, that if it was religion, they'd have done this straight after the settlement. But the fact they didn't means that they weren't that bothered. This is my argument, though. If you're going to argue for religion, you might say in this conclusion that it's no coincidence that these things came after the papal bull. So proving that it was religious in motivation, because essentially they had their permission from the Pope. All depends entirely, doesn't it, on what you think, which is why it's hard doing these feedback videos, because you could do 3,000 model answers. History is just, that's the nature of it. Anyway, this is my conclusion based on hopefully my argument, not trying to convince you what to say, although if I have done, then job done. That means I've done a good job of convincing you. Mary Queen of Scots, although a Catholic, might support religion as a cause, but she hadn't triggered a religious rebellion earlier, suggesting that that wasn't the motivation in 1569. Mary, having recently had a son and heir, supports the argument that she is more important than religion in that she would offer the smooth succession and stability the country wants that Elizabeth hadn't yet offered. However, if that was so pivotal, so again there's our analytical language, if it was so pivotal, it might have triggered the Scottish Alliance and a rebellion in 1566, the year she had the baby, the boy, but it didn't. So the fact that it was led by the nobles clearly shows it was a political rebellion, and they were tired of Elizabeth's interference and humiliation, taking their land, money and rolls. Coming so soon after the Council of the North shows that this was just the last straw and the trigger of the Northern Rebellion in 1569. So hopefully, having watched this and listened to this essay and looking at your own, you're starting to see what could have been done to improve this situation. And all together, this mock paper in this rather long video has helped you to see what you could have done and should have done. Remember, hopefully, to look at the other question as well, whether you did Northern Rebellion or legitimacy, just for revision purposes, okay? Also, keeping in mind that all of our lessons are available on our website at stchistory.com. So hopefully this has been helpful as a little feedback video, but also as revision. So watch this again near your exam, and the other feedback videos on our YouTube channel for the medicine, Cold War and Germany papers. Regardless of the content of it, the reminding you how to do the papers will be really useful as you approach your exams in the summer. If you do need anything else though, please let your teacher know. If you need any questions answered from another school, maybe drop a comment and we'll try and answer them. We're not trying to say these things are perfect, what we're making. I'm just trying to give you a bit of an overview in how these things could be structured. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this has proven helpful, and we will see you on the next video. Thank you very much and take care.